Okay, welcome. Last week we visited Ephesus, the site of Paul's ministry in around 54, 55 AD. And this week we're going to visit Ephesus again when John arrives there, the Apostle John, about 10 years or so later than Paul's time. So we're going to pull up those slides and we're going to be headed for Ephesus. Okay. Okay. So, Paul was here about 54, 55 AD, and then by 64, the summer of 64, there was a terrible fire in Rome. Much of Rome burned, and at that time, Peter lays down his life as a martyr in Rome, probably 64 or early 65 AD. About that same time, Paul is snagged by one of the Roman governors and sent to Rome, and also lays his life down for Christ about 65 or 66 probably. About 66 AD is also when the terrible Jewish revolt breaks out in Palestine, the 66 to 70 Jewish war. And you might recall Jesus had said, when you see the Jerusalem surrounded by armies, head for the hills. And he had several times prior to that warned about not being involved in the revolt. So many of the Jesus followers went across the river Jordan to the east to the city of Pella, which was a Greek city and therefore outside of the revolt. And about that time, it seems that John the Apostle also took a group of Jesus followers and headed north. And by this time, it's pretty clear to me that the Apostle Matthew was in Antioch, a very important early power center for Christianity. And I think John realized that with Peter gone and Paul gone, that there needed to be some apostolic anchoring in Ephesus. This was such an important city, such an important area. Remember in Acts it says that during Paul's time in Ephesus in the mid-50s, all Asia heard the word of the Lord. Many, many churches, at least a dozen Christian churches in this area. So I think John just had a sense that we needed some apostolic anchoring up here. About the same time, the Apostle Philip, who we met in John chapter 6, one of the 12 apostles, settled in Hierapolis and also died as a martyr there. You can visit his tomb, a very interesting place to visit there in Hierapolis. So John comes here about 67, probably 68 AD, and then later is put into a kind of exile on the island of Patmos, a rocky little island right there, not too far off the coast. And, historians are divided. John may have been sent there quite early when he first arrived in the late 60s, or it may have been after some years, maybe in the 90s, that John was sent to exile. All depends on whether you consider the background of the book of Revelation to be the reign of Nero in the late 60s or the reign of Domitian in the middle to late 90s. It's hard to tell because both of them were really bad dudes, and so it's hard to tell. The background is similar, whichever one it happens to be. But anyway, this is where John had quite a long ministry, wrote his gospel and the 3 epistles, and the book of Revelation, written either on Patmos or shortly after he returned from Patmos. So a lot of interesting, powerful things happening right in that part of the world. So, okay. Okay, again, we are in the upper city. This is the city clerk's office that we visited last time, where those little statues of Artemis were found that are so famous. You've seen that image reproduced many times over again. And then that city clerk's office is right over here, and then the lower city here. So the upper city and the lower city. There's only one spot that's visible from the upper city and the lower city, and that's a little hill right over here. And so that hill was chosen by Domitian in the 90s to build a large temple to Rome and to the gods of Rome, and with a giant statue of himself, Domitian. Since that was a small hill, not large enough for his pretentious temple and statue, he actually had to have that hill increased in size. That's what you're seeing here. All these arches, what's the Roman way of making a hill larger, just by building some arches and then bringing in some fill dirt. Very much what Herod did to increase the size of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And so on here in John's day, or toward the end of John's life anyway, was this massive temple to Rome, this massive statue of Domitian, which could be seen from the upper city and the lower city. Just an impressive display of Roman power and grandeur. Just a few fragments of that statue of Domitian have been found. They are in the museum here in Selçuk, which is just over the hill from Ephesus. And just to give you a little sense of scale, that gives you an idea how Domitian thought of himself. Okay, back in Ephesus, we're walking now in the footsteps not just of John, but in the footsteps of Paul. Paul was here for a couple of years, John here for a couple of decades probably, just really trying to give some good apostolic grounding to the Christian church here in Western Asia. And as I think I mentioned earlier, this is a real power center of Christianity from the time of John all the way down to about 700 AD. The first couple of hundred years, of course, a persecuted minority, but then after the Council of Constantinople, Council of Nicaea in 325, called by the Emperor Constantine, this Christianity became then the favored religion in this area for about 300 years until Islam came in. So there's Nike again. I promised you you'd see her again with the palm branch and the wreath. You might remember that Paul writes at one point, all the runners run, but only one gets the prize. We just had the Paris Olympics, and in the Paris Olympics, excuse me, you had the gold medal, the silver medal, the bronze medal. We had quite a to-do about the bronze medal with one of our gymnasts. Ancient world, there was no silver, there was no bronze. The first person to cross the finish line was the winner. Everybody else was just the first, second, and third loser. So all the runners run in the race, only one gets the prize. Only one gets the palm branch, which is a symbol you won the race. And then later the ceremony with the wreath. Now, that's why it's so important. In Revelation chapter 7, the great multitude of Jesus followers, the redeemed of all ages, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, how many of them are holding palm branches? Revelation 7, check it out. Every one of them. Because our leader has won the race and shared his victory with us. Powerful, powerful stuff. Okay. Remember that. Yeah. Walking on down then, farther down that hill to the library, out through the agora that we visited last week. That agora is right over there where Demetrius the silversmith had his profitable little business selling little silver statues of Artemis. And Paul was making such an impact that people were giving up on gods made by human hands. And so Demetrius's business was sloughing off. And so he started that little riot. This is the road down to the harbor. And as you walk down that road, you come to the harbor baths, and just behind the harbor baths, the church of 431. First Ecumenical Council in Nicaea, 325, north of here, and then 431 Council here at Ephesus. Council here at Ephesus in 431 was the council that declared Mary Theotokos, one who carries or bears God. Now, the early church fathers meant that as a comment on the identity of Mary's child, that Jesus did not become divine at his ascension or at his resurrection or even at his baptism, but he was eternally divine. The Word was in the beginning with God, and then the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So by calling her Theotokos, it was a comment on her child. Later, unfortunately, that became heard as a comment on her, and she became known as Mater Theou, which translates into English as Mother of God. So now you know where that comes from. Started out sound and kind of slid from there. Then all that happened right here in Ephesus in 431 AD. And the spirit of Demetrius being alive and well, you can still buy today little statues of Artemis, or if you prefer, little statues of Mary. So you can think about whether that's good or bad. Okay. Just a short distance away from Ephesus is the town of Seljuk, which is actually the location of that great temple of Artemis. The great temple of Artemis, 4 times the size of the Parthenon, basically built on somewhat swampy ground, so lost in the swamp over the years, finally discovered in the 1800s by a British railway engineer. So most of the pieces are in the British Museum today, except for one pillar column that has been rebuilt to show the site of that great wonder of the ancient world, and you can see a stork is putting that one pillar to good use. Right on the hill above, right on the hill where we are standing, is the Basilica to St. John, which we will get to in a few minutes. But first, we're skipping back and forth here, I realize that. We want to talk about Patmos. You will remember that John is exiled for a time on the island of Patmos on account of his testimony to Jesus. This would be either in around 68, around the time of Nero, or later, around 95, around the time of Domitian. In any case, it was a rocky, jagged little island in his day, kind of a place of exile, and the Romans sent him there to take him out of Ephesus so that he would not be making such an impact upon the citizenry of Ephesus and surrounding. After the collapse of Rome, Patmos was abandoned for hundreds and hundreds of years. Then around 1088, a Christian monk in Constantinople, Christodoulos, said, since that island was holy, because John lived there, we ought to have a monastery there, and we ought to commemorate John's cave. And so he is here presenting his monastery conceptually to John the Apostle, who has his gospel there. It's a nice little mosaic commemorating the rebirth of Patmos in 1088 as a holy Christian island instead of a Roman island of punishment and exile. Above the cave where John is thought to live, a beautiful mosaic, that's his cave, of course. This is John listening to the voice from heaven, and this is his secretary. And I said, of course, to my Greek friend, well, who's this? And she said, well, that's Prochorus. And I said, who's Prochorus? Well, Prochorus was St. John's secretary on the island of Patmos. Didn't they teach you anything in that seminary you went to? And of course, it's as typical. The Greek Orthodox people know a whole lot of stuff that we don't know because they have that unbroken tradition of things handed down from generation to generation. And of course, our Western professors, if they can't find it in their books, they don't believe it. So you just have to decide for yourself who you think has more authority, the boots on the ground people who have been there for generations, or our Western professors who have never even been there. So, okay, keep moving, Tom. We're in the cave now. Tradition tells us that John lived in a cave during his time, and the cave has now been upgraded considerably, as things tend to go. Um, but it's fun to be there and to visualize the possibility of him being there. Also on the island of Patmos, I couldn't help but laugh. I think one of my students, I couldn't help but feel like one of my students found the Apostle John hiding behind a tree and persuaded him to come out for a picture. It just really caught my attention. Okay, jumping forward in history again, after Christianity became the dominant religion in this area and throughout the Roman Empire, the Emperor Justinian, around 500 AD, built here, in honor of the Apostle John, a monumental entrance, and then a monumental basilica in honor of St. John. Just a very beautiful place to visit. This, you can see the remains of the basilica, about 529 AD, and the tomb of the Apostle John. Very probably the actual tomb of John. When modern archaeologists opened it, it was empty. Probably not grave robbers in this case, or bandits, but probably Christian bishops who wanted the bones of some saint in their church. So probably robbed by some bishop 100 or 200 years after the burial of John. So what happened after John died, the local Christians would have buried him very simply, but remembered the spot, and then later, after Christianity became dominant, then the Emperor Justinian came and built this terrific basilica over top of that tomb. Similar thing happened at Hierapolis with the tomb of Philip the Apostle. Okay, we're going to wrap it up here with at the Basilica of St. John with the baptistry. You can see the baptistry in the shape of a cross, and then you step down into the baptistry. 3 steps down, 3 steps for the Holy Trinity, and then you're baptized, and then 3 steps up. You would, in ancient church, you would have stood or knelt in the baptistry, and the priest would have poured the holy water over you, called effusion. And we had a nice discussion here about the mode of baptism. So, okay, well, that's the ministry of John in the time of. So I hope you will read with fresh eyes the Gospel of John, written here in Ephesus, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, written here in Ephesus, and the book of Revelation, written either in Ephesus or on the island of Patmos, just off the coast of Ephesus. So, well, that was great fun. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you again later for some more journeys to biblical lands.